Hello, and thank you for accessing this recording. In this bite-sized recording, we're going to explore the Chief Examiner's report for Digital Support Services Core Exams and ESP from the Summer 24 series. We'll be providing some insight into their findings around the core papers A and B and the employer set projects, sharing some key themes to celebrate, some areas for development, and how to address these within your classroom. So from this series, we can see that overall students generally performed well, answering most questions across papers A and B with some strong responses to recall-based questions such as multiple choice or questions requiring basic definitions. Achievement varied widely with some exceptional 15-mark responses, though many students did not attempt these questions. In terms of areas for development, some students left sections unanswered, particularly in Core Paper B, Section D. Students often struggled with questions requiring deeper analytical responses, particularly when asked to analyse, evaluate or provide reasoned judgments. Many students lost marks due to a lack of detail in their explanations, again, particularly where required reasoned judgments or conclusions were asked for. This was common in higher order thinking tasks where students gave superficial answers rather than reasoned responses. Now we'll explore the core papers in more detail. So in section A of paper A, it was good to see that many students performed well, being able to identify and explain a range of factors relating to business context and culture. In question 8, it was highlighted that providers would benefit from increasing students' knowledge of virtual systems and the risks associated with them. Overall, the 15-mark question was answered well. The quality of written communication as a whole was good. In section B, again, many of the questions were answered well. It was noted, however, that providers would benefit from increasing students' knowledge of digital inclusion, as this affected marks on both questions 14 and 18. In these cases, students failed to provide reasoned judgments and conclusions from their discussion points. Some students' answers to extended response questions were limited, particularly on question 18, where knowledge around cloud services appeared quite basic. And then in section C of paper A, students' knowledge on emerging technologies was very good, and many students understood budgeting in relation to the principles of project planning. However, on question 22, marks were lost when unrelated principles were identified. When asked to identify valid and accurate sources of information on question 23, some students lost marks by identifying sources such as Wikipedia. As in earlier sections, reasoned judgments and sound conclusions continue to present a challenge in this section of the paper. So now moving on to core paper B. In section A, although many students were able to identify a fault analysis tool on question 2, they didn't seem to understand what it was, so students would benefit from increased awareness of the different types of tools. It would also benefit providers to clarify different types of communication methods. For example, on question 3, students responded with PowerPoint rather than formal or informal or written or verbal communication. Again, marks were lost on questions that required justification or analysis with their response. In section B, question 10, students seemed to struggle to understand how transitioning to agile ways of working could help the client brief. Providers could also improve students' understanding of the application of usability and audience testing, which did affect marks on question 11. And again, overall, marks were lost due to missing reasoned judgments and conclusions. In section C on paper B, students lost marks due to not developing their answers. For example, giving examples of legislation but not then linking them to the task. Or in question 1, giving examples of counter misuse crimes but not linking to the Computer Misuse Act in their responses. Some students lost marks on question 20 by not understanding what ransomware was. On question 24, students demonstrated reasonable knowledge. However, again, marks were lost due to limited responses, specifically around the impact of threats and vulnerabilities of a biometric comparison system. In section D, it was noted that students did not always consider the total marks available for the question, and therefore their responses were limited. For example, in questions 26 and 28, students were able to identify a response but did not describe or explain their ideas. On question 30, many students did not appear to understand what computational thinking was, so often lost marks on this question. It is recommended that providers focus further training in this area. Overall, evaluations should have arguments for and against, so marks could be lost for not having this or not concluding. In question 34, knowledge around data modelling concepts and tools was limited, therefore answers were often limited or vague. However, the quality of written communication overall was generally reasonable. The second assessment within Year 1 of the Digital Support Service T-Level is the Employer Set project. Let's look at the Chief Examiner's feedback in more detail, broken down by some key themes arising across the 3 Digital Support Services ESPs. Overall, students' performance varied across tasks, resulting in diverse grades. Proficient students excelled in tasks 1 and 3, which demanded higher order skills and the application of knowledge. However, some students found these tasks challenging, highlighting clear distinctions between those who grasped the concept and those who didn't. During interviews, many students exhibited effective communication skills and engaged well with constructed questions. In terms of technical competence, students who understood the tasks excelled, especially in hands-on problem solving and technical tasks like troubleshooting faults and understanding security or network infrastructure issues. Most providers effectively presented their evidence, which greatly facilitated the review process. The audio files and documents were consistently formatted as MP3 and PDF, which ensured compatibility. There were, however, some issues with background noise in interview recordings. Efforts should be made to minimise this impact. And unfortunately, students' inclusion of hyperlinks in their documents proved non-functional, as all evidence undergoes scanning, which results in the removal of links. Some common areas for development that arose across all 3 SPs are as follows. Some students lacked critical thinking skills and struggled to justify their choices, whether in proposing solutions or troubleshooting. An area for improvement, therefore, is to develop student skills in linking their choices to the rationale. During interviews, some students struggle to move away from their prepared scripts and missed opportunities for follow-up questions. The email task revealed a need for more practice in communicating with both technical and non-technical audiences. Further practice of audience-appropriate communication during the course would be beneficial. Where mathematical calculations were required, some students often failed to include essential calculations or detail, for example, whether costs were one-off or recurring. Strengthening students' numeracy skills, particularly in relation to budgeting in a real-world context, would be recommended. There was often confusion about creating test plans and verifying that faults had been rectified. Students could benefit from more structured training on how to approach testing and validation. There was also notable room for improvement in applying a logical problem-solving approach, as evidenced in tasks 1 and 3, particularly when justifying choices and assessing how well their solutions met the brief's requirements. It's also important to mention here that unfortunately, instances of plagiarised work this summer increased. This was often the case in task 3, where students used pre-existing online diagrams or blocks of text. Students must be aware that this is not acceptable. In task 3, students are required to demonstrate their numeracy proficiency in their proposal. However, Some students only provided a list of prices, often in dollars, without any accompanying calculations, resulting in a score of 0. Outstanding submissions included comprehensive tables outlining costs, also highlighting quantities, specifying whether the expenses were recurring or one-time, including subtotals, and providing a final total. Using basic arithmetic operations such as addition, subtraction, multiplication or division was often enough to attain full marks, making this a crucial area for students to focus and improve upon. Some students also estimated costs for alternative approaches, such as on-site versus cloud services, and this is to be encouraged. In tasks 2, 3 and 4, more students avoided losing marks by paying more attention to spelling, punctuation and grammar errors. Students are advised to cultivate the habit of proofreading their work thoroughly. Post-project reviews. In this task, students must summarise the key issues identified in task 3 and their proposed solution. Some students summarised other tasks that were unnecessary and therefore reduced this time on their task 3 summary. Some students struggled to assess their performance in the task, which limited their overall grade, resorting to using descriptive language rather than evaluative language. It is noteworthy that more students were able to link their solution to the initial problem and make judgments on how effectively it fulfilled requirements. Now that we've explored some common themes across the ESP assessments, we can look at some teaching and learning strategies to improve student outcomes. It is important to develop critical thinking skills with your students. Encourage students to move away from just describing their ideas and becoming more evaluative and analytical in their approach. For example, ask them to assess strengths, weaknesses and overall impact on business efficiency for a scenario. Use example project briefs to make links with industry and encourage discussions in class. Analyse the pros and cons of different approaches. You could use reflective models such as Gibbs or Kolb to give students a framework to underpin their evaluation. Create opportunities in class to develop communication skills, particularly in relation to how to conduct an interview. Setting up role-play scenarios throughout the course will build confidence and encourage students to move away from their scripted questions and create opportunities for follow-up questions which could add valuable depth and insight to their findings. Students should also practice presenting information to a range of audiences, for example, technical and non-technical, both through verbal and written techniques. Although students are becoming more effective at proofreading, it is still important to build and develop these skills. It could be useful to speak to someone from your English department for ideas to improve spelling, grammar and punctuation. In relation to this, students need to be able to check their work for clarity and use a logical structure. Using scaffolded frameworks for this in class could help students become accustomed to planning and organising their work effectively. It would be useful to use sample or past papers to unpick the math skills required for the ESP. Ensuring students are confident in applying the 4 operations, i.e. addition, subtraction, multiplication and division, is essential. Providing real-world context during the course for students to practice these skills would really help. For example, budgeting for a project. Getting students used to looking at the marks for individual questions is beneficial. Familiarisation with the command verbs will help students focus their responses. For example, are they required to identify, describe, explain or evaluate? Look at the marks available for a question should also help with time management, ensuring they do not spend too long on tasks with fewer marks. And then in terms of creating test plans, opportunities should be given throughout the course for students to apply their knowledge and skills to real-world scenarios with different contexts and briefs. Practicing logical processes will help students to better structure their thinking and responses in this area. Now that we've explored some strategies and real ideas you can try in your classroom, I'd like to remind you of the support we offer during your T-level delivery. There are many more recorded sessions like this one on our YouTube playlist, which is accessible following the link or by searching for NCFE on YouTube. You can also find support materials via our qualifications page. If you're new to T-levels, please do visit this page. Here you'll find lots of resources to support your delivery. On the NCFE website, you'll find the T-level events booking page. Here you can join live events and see what other support we're offering moving forward. The page is divided into months, so you can easily see what's available and plan it into your diary. We also offer one-to-one support. If you haven't done so already, please do book a call with me so that we can work together as you begin or continue your T-level delivery. These calls are designed to be bespoke for your provider and a chance to get support and for us to answer your questions. Lastly, we'd really appreciate it if you could use the QR code on screen to share your valuable feedback. Your comments really do help us reflect on our sessions and offer targeted and relevant support, which in turn allows you to get the best outcomes for your students. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope you found this recording useful, and I look forward to seeing you at our live events over the coming academic year.